a more realistic candidate. It was possession, by the way, the charge, not trafficking or anything like that. Well, here's what the chief has to say about this.
The nation's drug problem is one of human suffering. And as a police officer, but also in my own family, I have experienced the effects that drugs can have on our youth, our families, and our communities.
Jeffrey Miron is a Harvard economics professor and a frequent guest on this program, but we've never had him on, at least as far as I can recall, to talk about drugs. Here's why we're doing this now. He's written a book where he explains what legalizing drugs would save our economy. You ready for the number? $77 billion a year. For comparison, that's the figure that Bernie Madoff admits to bilking investors out of in his Ponzi scheme so they could be all paid back with one quick swoop. Or it's also the 2-year state budget just passed by the state of Wyoming. That means they run their state for 2 years with that money. Professor Miron, thanks so much for being with us, sir.
Nice to be back here.
Break it down for us. You know, we got that figure of 77 million from you. How did you get to 77 billion?
Well, you would get about 44 billion by not spending the money we're currently spending on police for arrests, on judges and prosecutors for all the trials, for prisons and prison guards, et cetera, for the incarcerations. And you get another 33 or so billion by collecting tax revenue on legal drugs in the same way we collect lots of tax revenue on cigarettes and alcohol. So it's a combination of those two things, and that number puts together the state and the federal, but it gets you what used to be thought of as a big number, although these days it doesn't sound so impressive.
Not post Bernie Madoff.
No.
But you know, some people would say, you know, we make a lot of money by incarcerating these people. We've got people in prisons, and that's part of the economy as well. And would we have to lose the jobs of all these guys who are part of the DEA and police officers fighting on the border? Why would you want to eliminate those jobs?
Well, we don't want to create jobs by forbidding something that people can use responsibly. That argument would say we should go back to criminalizing alcohol. It would say we should criminalize food, because after all, if we made food illegal, there'd be billions and billions of people violating the law every day, and we could hire zillions of police to enforce those laws. So that's just not a very effective argument.
It sounds like what you're saying is that we are almost at the same place today where we were back during Prohibition. That we've got a problem, and the best way of solving it would be of getting rid of the prohibition vis-a-vis alcohol.
Absolutely. And of course, it turns out that one of the reasons that the nation came to its senses in 1933 was because of a big economic downturn, the Great Depression, and they realized that they wanted more tax revenue, and legalizing alcohol again was one way to do it. Now, that's not the only reason to legalize. It's much more important that legalization would, for example, get rid of all the violence in Mexico that we've been observing recently.
You know, it's interesting. Kurlikowski, that potential drug czar that we were just showing there, he's one of the few police chiefs who's actually tried to not decriminalize it legally, but make it so that it's like, you know, maybe a slap on the wrist. Yesterday, on the other hand, we were doing a story about some folks in Texas who were putting people in jails for a long time for just having paraphernalia, a pipe, not even the actual substance itself, in their car. So on one side of the country, we have the law being treated one way. On another side of the country, we've got the law being treated completely differently. It's like a piecemeal approach. Is that part of the problem?
Well, that's a part of the problem, but I think there's a more fundamental problem, which the law just doesn't make sense. For something that is potentially dangerous, there might be a reason to regulate it. There might be a reason to tax it. That's exactly what we do with alcohol and cigarettes. But we leave them as legal goods because that way we avoid having the underground markets that create corruption, that create violence, that redistribute income to criminals, and a whole set of negative ancillary effects.
Fascinating. What kind of reaction? I mean, you're a Harvard professor. You're not supposed to be writing about stuff like this. I mean, people are going to think you're a stoner or something. I mean, what kind of reaction have you gotten from this, and do you think it'll ever fly?
From economists, I get a lot of very positive response. Economists think about unintended consequences and recognize that a lot of these negative effects we attribute to drugs are due to drug prohibition. Politicians don't want to touch it because it doesn't seem to be politically viable right now, and that's the problem.
That's interesting. Man, I'll tell you what, interesting discussion. I'm glad we did this. Professor, thank you for being with us, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
There is new information on the teenage gunman who massacred 15 people in Germany. He was online the night before. He told somebody exactly what he was going to do. Well, why didn't that